Welcome back, rail fans. It has been a really long time since I've posted anything. I think the last time was just an empty basement and a plan and some progress on the refinishing or finishing of the basement. But finally, I've actually been working pretty hard, just haven't been recording or documenting any of it. So here we are in the Railroad West End staging. So this is Pittsburgh, Newcastle, and Connellsville. Somewhat south actually in terms of geography, but Railroad West. So this is a 10-track staging yard. The former railroad only had 6 at either end. This will have 10. And oddly enough, this is all of my rolling stock, or almost all of it, that was in service from the last railroad. Probably means I need at least this much more as I build the rest of the railroad. So it was just nice to get it out of the box and out on the railroad again. So all of this staging yard, all of the turnouts and the track are all leftover or salvaged rather from the previous railroad. So that was a nice benefit. You know, Atlas switches, they're not the most aesthetic, but they're pretty good in terms of operation if you've made some put jumpers on the back for the points and so forth, which they already had, so that was just kind of able to put those right into the new railroad. Also, Jim Herzog, who has an amazing Shamokin division for the Reading Railroad here, not too far away from me, used 1/4-inch phone jacks to energize his staging tracks, and that's a really neat for a bunch of reasons. One, it prevents operators from turning on more than one track at a time. However, since this railroad is, my proposed railroad is pretty extensive, the bus wire is 12 gauge and the sub buses are all 14 gauge. And so then to get the phone jacks, you'd have to reduce that down to smaller wires. And as such, the long runs of sub bus for this pretty long staging yard that'll hold, most of the tracks will hold about 24 car trains with at least 2 locomotives. That becomes just an extra step. Not to mention the fact that all the phone jack equipment and connectors are not easily accessible. You'd have to order those. You know, Radio Shack doesn't have any brick and mortar stores anymore. So I made a modification to that, and what I did is used outlets and simply just a plug that I put a jumper between the hot and neutral leg. So each one of these, I'll label and number these eventually, but each one of these outlets is just a track. And of course, like, these outlets are like 89 cents or something like that. But the real benefit wasn't the cost so much. The real benefit was because, you know, these outlets are designed for residential wiring, and I'm using residential wiring for the whole bus and sub-bus harness. That made it just kind of convenient to use the same wire size and fasteners and so forth. And one of the other things, and I think I did it on the last railroad as well, but using, instead of terminal blocks, just buying basically neutral bar or ground bus bars for electrical panels. And again, they are designed for the size wire and type of wire I'm using, so rather than buying expensive terminal blocks that you have to then crimp ends on, this just, you strip the wire, put it in, and fasten it underneath the set screws. So that's the plan, and so far I like it. We're obviously pretty far away from operating, so we'll see how that works. A little bit of a concern was, you know, how far this sticks out, but keeping in mind, if you look at my design from maybe 2 videos ago, I had the Third Planet design in there. All of my aisles are at least 36 inches wide, and actually here it may get a slight bit wider, so I don't think that'll be too much of a challenge. This particular area will have the town of Clearfield above it, so this staging yard will be accessible but not super easy. It might be 10 or 12 inches of separation between the decks, but other than just pulling your train in or out, the only person who will be monkeying around building trains in between sessions will be me, and I don't think I'll have too much of a problem doing that. So again, Atlas turnouts in the staging yard, but as soon as I get into the modeled portion, I'm doing everything in fast tracks, hand-laid track. So we're coming into the town of Butler here. This bridge will get cut out. It's just temporary for the time being. Also following Derek Glass's example, and I know John Arthur was using plastic strips, which obviously works too. Derek Glass had either developed or seen someone use masking tape. And so that's what I did. I used masking tape, and on the main line here I used 10 layers. But what's nice about it is you can, every 2 inches you add another layer. So it's a very nice gradual transition. I think I calculated the thickness of the tape, and 10 layers is basically like 5.5 inches scale, which seemed about right for main line. The siding, I think I only used 6 because that's a little slower speed. So it's very subtle, but really, really a neat effect. I think the original design also called for 42-inch minimum radius, which I think I could have made work based on my third planet drawings, but for a whole host of reasons I reduced that down to 40. So it's still 40-inch minimum radius for the main line is still incredibly larger than I had previously. So this hand-laid spur here will be for standard plate glass. That is their gondolas of sand delivery, and then the backtrack, which isn't done yet, will be for coal deliveries. And then I'm going to be able to reuse the Carter Lumber Company building from the previous railroad. I did have to do some selective compression and flipping, actually. Carter Lumber should be on the other side of the tracks, but since I built that as a backdrop, it's only like 3 or 4 inches deep. I didn't know that I wanted to reach over it here in the front, because International Staple and Machine is also, then this is an old Pullman Standard building that's not going to be used. It's just a placeholder for the time being. That's also on the other side of the track, so I just would have had 2 really big buildings that you'd have to reach over. So I decided not to do that. And here where the putty knife is, there actually is, and it's been reconfigured, but in '74, according to USGS topographic maps, there was a crossing here for these 2 spurs. So while some might say that that's not prototypical, it actually is. And why would I do it? Because I'm going to have to hand lay a 19-degree crossing in code 70. I wouldn't do that if just for fun, but that's what actually should be there. So I'm trying to do a better job with this railroad of matching the prototype than I did previously. This will be a creek that comes through. Here is then the western side of the Butler yard, and actually the ISM and Carter are actually, although they're outside of it, they're in between the 2 legs of the Y with the Bessemer and Lake Erie. So I didn't model the far end, simply just not enough space. But here is the other end of the Y, and this is called Butler Transfer. So this is where Bessemer and Lake Erie and the B&O exchange cars. So this is just one. This isn't finished yet, but there'll be 3 tracks here. The real thing has 5, but as always, selective compression. So then here we have the main. I have a siding on either side, and then this yard track runs all the way through and is double-ended. Then there'll be 3 more yard tracks that are stub-ended in Butler. Finishing up doing some 32nd-inch shims to get a number 8 crossover to sit nicely. And then this is the town of East Butler, so this will be Keystone Tubular Service Company, and then on the aisle here, this will be a spur for what I think is Spang & Company that made well pumps or well motors. So once I'm out of the main Butler town area, I've switched into using spline, and I used a little of it on the last railroad, but this is going to be extensive here. And what's really going to be fun is, having again a 40-inch radius on the main line on the outside, with a long arc with super elevation. I'm looking forward to watching trains run around that. So then the main and the siding come back together. This is the Butler runner, which even per the timetable says is under the control of the Butler Yardmaster, so that'll be my switching lead. So I'll have a number 8 turnout here. Then there's a road crossing, and then WS Tower. Actually, WS Tower might be on this side of the road, but WS Tower is here. So this is where the turnout would be for the northern branch, and then there's a turnout. There's going to be a turnout for a stub-ended siding. I'm just going to model it. It's not accurate, but I'm going to model it showing it stub-ended because this is where I'm going to set off and pick up power, which they did do at WS Tower. So that's as far as we've got on bench work. I've got some temporary braces on the tops of the framing here just to make sure everything stays square until I go all the way around the back side and everything will lock up. But this way there's nothing, there's no legs anywhere close to where you're walking. Everything's just a center framing pier. So I apologize for the long delay in making this video, but I have been working. The other thing I thought I'd do is I want to make sure the backdrop is a little higher than 24 inches because that tends to be hard to take photos, but I didn't want it to go all the way up to the ceiling. So I think I'm at like 30 or 32. And that'll do two things. It'll let some light and air pass over top of the backdrop, but also be tall enough to take good photos. So lots of details to work out yet, but made some progress. Oh, one other thing, one of the reasons this took a while is if we look under here, we can see a track in the back here. So I've already set up what will be the Rural Valley branch, and that will come out of the town of Echo, which is over, be in the next, at the other end of the base of this peninsula. Let me walk around slowly. So I set up Butler to do all of that work on the Rural Valley branch underneath, and I'll walk to the other side of the basement and show you that. Once I get out here, this will be the town of Craigsville, and this will go a lot faster because it's just a single track main, so it'll just be one piece of spline. So here is where, coming out of the Echo Y, is where the Rural Valley branch will run underneath the town of Butler. And then it'll run up the back of this wall towards Punxsutawney. Walk to the other side. Got a temporary workbench set up here, so I've been making lots of turnouts thanks to Rob Bennett's generosity in lending me some of his jigs. Still whittling down some of the house stuff, but here is the bench work for what will ultimately be the Rural Valley branch, and that's going to come around and go underneath the East Salamanca staging. So converse to the Pittsburgh side where Clearfield is above it, here the staging yard will be on the top and the branch line will be on the bottom. But here's the Rural Valley branch coming out underneath the Standard Plate Glass Company. So there'll be a backdrop here just up to the upper deck, and again, it's only two levels or two decks for branch lines. So the only town here will be the west end of Du Bois. This will be C&M Junction, and so that's where the Y will tie into the Clearfield branch. So there'll be a backdrop up to the main line bench work, and then I think I'm going to leave this open just so there's a little bit of, again, light and air, and here's a return, so it'll be nice for air to be able to circulate that way. So making progress. It's taken a while, but like I said, doing a lot of hand laying of turnouts and really trying to make sure the track work is operationally reliable, because it's no fun operating if things are coming off the rails all the time. So I've taken a lot of time to get things very level and shimmed and properly gapped, and more to follow. Thanks for your patience.